spring mornings in Asheville, North Carolina, always carried a gentle beauty that felt almost unreal. The first rays of sunlight peeked over the towering Blue Ridge Mountains, casting a soft golden glow over the old brick streets. A light mist still clung to the wooden rooftops, mingling with the faint scent of wildflowers in the cool breeze. Emily Carter, 30 years old, hurried down the sidewalk in worn-out sneakers, her canvas bag swinging across her shoulder in rhythm with her rushed steps. Inside the bag was her makeup kit, something she jokingly called her lifesaver. As a freelance makeup artist, Emily led a simple life, free of grand dreams or drama. After a few failed relationships, she had settled into a quiet routine. Work in the morning, return to her small apartment in the evening, play a country music playlist on Spotify, and drift off to sleep. But today was a mess. A last-minute client had called her at 6 a.m., asking for emergency makeup services at a photo studio 20 minutes away on foot. She had thrown on a pair of jeans, tied her hair in a loose bun, and rushed out the door without breakfast. Now it was 7:45, with just 15 minutes left to get there. "I'm a disaster," she muttered, jogging while trying to fix a stray lock of hair blown loose by the crisp spring wind. Reaching a quiet corner near Pack Square Park, she stopped, panting. "No way I'll make it," she thought, glancing around for anything that could help her pull herself together. And then she saw it. A sleek black SUV parked by the curb, its polished windows smooth and reflective like a perfect mirror. Emily didn't think twice. She set her bag down on the pavement, opened her kit, and pulled out a peach-colored lipstick. Tilting her head in front of the makeshift mirror, she applied the lipstick quickly, but with care. Then she smoothed her hair with her hand, murmuring, "Not bad, Emily." A small, carefree smile crept onto her face, rare in the middle of a frantic morning. A breeze swept past, carrying the scent of nearby wildflowers, and she paused for a second, eyes closed, taking in a brief moment of peace in the rush of life. Inside the SUV, James Harrington sat quietly in the back seat, holding a steaming cup of black coffee. At 35, he was one of the youngest millionaires in America's hospitality industry, owning a chain of luxury resorts stretching from Asheville to Nashville, plus a few high-end villas in Florida. His life was a string of closed-door meetings in oak-paneled boardrooms, multi-million-dollar deals, and the cold smiles of the elite. Today, he was headed to a major real estate auction, a golden opportunity to expand his empire. But his driver had asked for a quick stop here to handle an urgent call from headquarters. James had planned to check his emails, but something outside the window caught his eye. A woman, no, maybe a girl, was standing there, using the window of his SUV as a makeup mirror. He froze. Coffee cup paused mid-air. She wasn't beautiful in the glamorous model-on-a-red carpet way he was used to seeing at fancy parties, the kind with glittering cocktail dresses and expensive jewelry. She wore a thin hoodie, worn sneakers, and her hair was tied up in a way that screamed, "I just ran out the door!" And yet, there was something about her he couldn't look away from. The carefree smile as she smoothed her hair, the sparkle in her eyes as she said something softly to herself. It all felt like a strange breeze sweeping through the carefully controlled, bone-dry world he lived in. Emily had no idea she was being watched. She pulled out her blush, dabbing it lightly onto her cheeks, and muttered, "Just a little mascara and I'll be fine. I can't possibly look worse than a stray cat." She chuckled at her own joke and bent down to dig for her mascara wand. Then came a soft click. The car window began to roll down. Startled, Emily dropped her blush compact, which tumbled onto the sidewalk, leaving a faint pink smudge on the bricks. She looked up, and there, right in front of her, was a man in an expensive gray suit, green eyes wide with surprise and something else, amusement. "Sorry," the man said, his voice low and polite, with just a hint of a soft, southern drawl. "Didn't mean to startle you." Emily froze, her face flushing hot like she'd just been caught stealing. She stammered, "Oh, I didn't know someone was inside. I'm so sorry. I'm late for work, and—" She bent down to pick up her blush compact, her hands trembling, silently wishing the sidewalk would crack open and swallow her whole. "I wasn't trying to— Really?" James smiled. A rare, genuine smile, not the rehearsed kind he used in boardroom meetings. "It's okay. I've been late before too, though not very often." He tilted his head slightly, watching her more closely. "You used my window pretty well. Better than I'd do with tying my hair, that's for sure." Emily looked up, not sure whether to laugh or cry. His gentle joke helped ease the tension, but not enough to erase the embarrassment. Thanks," she said awkwardly, hurriedly stuffing her makeup back into the bag. She stood up and turned to leave. "I really have to go. Sorry again." "Wait a sec," James called out, his voice rising just a little. But Emily had already rushed off, nearly sprinting away down the street, her figure disappearing behind a line of wildflowers in bloom. He watched her go, a strange feeling rising in his chest. In his world, people always approached him with some angle. Money, fame, a shot at something big. But this woman, this girl, she had just stumbled into his space, used his car window as a mirror, and ran off like he was nobody. That honesty, that simplicity, tugged at something inside him, more than any million-dollar deal ever had. The SUV engine came back to life. The driver turned and asked, "Sir, shall we go?" James nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the window, on the spot where she'd just vanished. He set down his coffee and murmured, "Who is she?" Then he turned to his assistant in the front seat, his tone calm but firm. "Find out who she is. I want to know, by today." The assistant nodded without question, used to handling sudden requests from his boss. With James Harrington, a quiet comment like that usually marked the beginning of something big. Meanwhile, Emily had just arrived at the studio, breathless, her heart racing from both the sprint and the lingering embarrassment. She had no idea that her ordinary little world had just brushed against a completely different one, a world she never imagined she'd be a part of. 3 days after that chaotic morning of using a car window as a mirror, Emily had pretty much forgotten the whole thing. Life had returned to its usual rhythm. A cup of cheap coffee in her tiny kitchen, makeup jobs for everyday clients in the afternoon, and some Taylor Swift playing in the background as she wound down for the night. But today, something different happened. She got a surprise job offer to do makeup for a group of models at a major event at the Biltmore Estate, one of Asheville's most luxurious venues. Probably a referral from Sarah, Emily guessed, thinking of the colleague who had complimented her work last week. She didn't ask too many questions. She just packed up her kit and caught the next bus, completely unaware that fate was waiting for her. The Biltmore Estate rose before her like something out of a fairy tale. The Greystone mansion sat on a sweeping green lawn, glowing in the golden light of the afternoon sun. Tall granite columns, deep red velvet curtains in the windows. Everything felt so far from her usual world. Emily entered the backstage area through the staff entrance, her sneakers making soft, squeaky sounds on the polished wooden floors. She quickly got to work. Lipstick, eyeliner, blush, moving from model to model, throwing out little jokes to help them relax. "Give me a smile, there we go. You look better than a princess in this castle," she told one young model, making the whole group laugh. As Emily was putting the finishing touches on the last model's makeup, someone walked into the backstage area. She didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just another event staff member. But then a deep, familiar voice spoke up. "Didn't expect to see you here?" Emily looked up, her makeup brush freezing mid-air. Standing there in a gray suit, green eyes lit with amusement, was the man from the SUV. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was surprise or embarrassment. James Harrington had recognized her the moment he stepped in. He was at the Biltmore estate to check on the charity event his company was hosting. His assistant still hadn't been able to track down any information about the Mirror Girl, but fate had apparently taken matters into its own hands. Seeing Emily in a simple t-shirt, holding a brush like an artist painting on someone else's face, he felt an odd pull, something he couldn't quite explain. "Hey," he said, stepping closer. "I'm James. And you are?" "Emily," she replied, her voice a little shaky. "Emily Carter." She bent down to pick up a lipstick that had rolled under the table, trying to hide the redness creeping into her cheeks. I didn't expect to see you again. About the other day, I'm still really sorry." James smiled and took a seat in an empty chair nearby. "No need to apologize. I should be thanking you. You brightened up my Monday morning." He tilted his head slightly, watching her. "Do you work here?" "Not really," Emily said, turning back to the model to mask her discomfort. "Just here for the day. Freelance gig?" She didn't want to say too much, afraid he'd think she was trying to impress him. But James didn't leave. He sat there and asked a few light questions. "When did you start doing makeup? Did you grow up in Asheville?" Emily answered briefly, still focused on her work, wondering why this man, clearly out of her league, was chatting with her like this. Didn't he have better things to do? Once the last model had walked out, the backstage area fell quiet. James stood up and offered, "Would you like to grab a coffee?" "My treat, as a thank you for letting me lend you my window." He smiled again, and this time it felt real, none of the polished charm he probably used with investors. Emily hesitated. She wanted to say no. This man didn't belong in her world, not with that tailored suit and the calm confidence in his voice. But his eyes looked sincere, not mocking or flirtatious. "Okay," she finally nodded. "But I don't drink black coffee. Too bitter." They sat in a quiet corner of the hotel's garden, under the shade of an old oak tree that stretched out over the lawn. James ordered a latte for Emily and a black coffee for himself. He looked at her and asked, "So, what's your life like? I mean, outside of rushed mornings and using strangers' car windows as mirrors?" Emily laughed, the tension in her shoulders easing for the first time. "Pretty normal, honestly. I live alone, work, listen to music, sometimes walk around Lake Lure. Nothing too exciting." She took a sip of her latte, then shot back. "What about you? Bet your life's packed with luxury cars and castles like this one." She gestured toward the estate. James looked out over the lawn, his voice quieter. "Busy, yeah, but not always fun. I grew up with board meetings, handshakes, and people who only smile when they want something." He turned back to her, his gaze thoughtful. "Your life? That kind of normalcy? I've never really had that." Emily was taken aback by his honesty. For a moment, her heart fluttered, not because of his looks or status, but because of the rare openness in his words. But then she reminded herself, who is this guy really? A wealthy man with homes like this. And I'm just a girl who rides the bus. She set down her latte with a faint smile. "Sounds exhausting," she said gently. "But hey, at least you don't have to worry about missing work because your bus breaks down." James laughed out loud, a warm, genuine sound that echoed softly through the quiet garden. "You're right. Maybe I should try riding the bus sometime." He paused, then asked, "Can I see you again?" Not backstage or through a car window, but a proper coffee this time. Emily looked at him, her thoughts tangled. She liked him, the way he talked, the way he listened, but the gap between them felt too wide, like this estate compared to her tiny apartment. She stood up, grabbed her makeup bag, and said softly, "I'm not sure." "We live in two very different worlds, you know that. You've got your fancy SUV, and I'm just riding the bus every day. It's not the same." James opened his mouth to respond, but Emily had already turned and was walking quickly toward the gate. He didn't follow, but deep down he had made up his mind. He wouldn't let her slip away again. On the bus ride home, Emily held her bag tightly and told herself not to get carried away. But James's eyes, the warmth of that latte, and the calm strength in his voice stayed with her, like a song she couldn't stop hearing. After their coffee at the Biltmore estate, Emily tried her best to keep her distance. She didn't respond to James's text, a simple invitation to a small coffee shop downtown, and told herself it was better that way. But fate had other plans. Just a week later, Emily was sitting in her tiny apartment, flipping through pages of an old book under the soft glow of her reading lamp, when her phone started buzzing non-stop. It was Sarah, her co-worker, sounding frantic. "Emily, you're on the news. Go online, quick." Frowning, Emily opened her laptop. A bold headline screamed at her from the local news site. "Mystery gold digger targeting young Asheville millionaire." Below it was a grainy photo taken from a distance, her and James sitting under the oak tree in the hotel garden. Her face wasn't very clear, but someone had captioned it. "An ordinary girl trying to sneak into high society?" The article continued with nasty speculation. "James Harrington, hotel tycoon, spotted getting cozy with a backstage staffer. Is this love or a calculated move?" Emily's heart pounded. She scrolled down to the comments, and things only got worse. "Another gold digger," someone wrote. "Look at her, obviously just after his money," said another. One even guessed. "Probably some bargain bin makeup artist. She's not in his league." Emily slammed her laptop shut, her hands trembling. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't used to strangers staring, judging. But now it felt like the whole world was watching her, condemning her, and she hadn't done anything wrong. The next day, her worst fears came true. As she stepped outside to go to work, a white car parked right in front of her building. The window rolled down, and a man pointed a camera straight at her, snapping photo after photo. "Are you dating James Harrington? Any comments?" he shouted. Emily panicked, rushing back inside and slamming the door behind her. Her phone kept buzzing. Co-workers, old friends, even unknown numbers, all wanting to know what was going on. A friend texted, "Emily, are you really dating a billionaire? Why didn't you tell me?" But the tone wasn't excitement. It was suspicion. Her quiet life crumbled in just a few hours. She didn't dare leave the house. She couldn't bring herself to answer her phone. At the studio, she overheard co-workers whispering behind her back, "I know her. She's always pretending to be so humble." A regular client even canceled, saying, "I don't want to get caught up in some drama." Emily sat curled up in the corner, clutching her makeup case like it was the only thing she could still rely on. It felt like the whole world had turned against her, all because of a man she'd only met twice. Meanwhile, James was at his office in downtown Asheville, staring out the window with a tight expression. His assistant walked in and placed a newspaper on his desk. "Sir, this is spreading fast. We need to respond." James skimmed the headline, his jaw tightening. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice cold. His assistant shook his head. "Probably paparazzi hiding out at the event. They saw you with Miss Carter and ran with the story. James slammed his hand on the desk and stood up. She doesn't deserve this. Call the lawyers. Have them demand the media take everything down immediately. I don't want her name dragged around any longer. He knew he could use his money and power to shut the rumors down, but he also knew that wouldn't undo the damage Emily was already dealing with. That afternoon, he went to Emily's apartment, the address his assistant had quietly tracked down the week before. He knocked gently on the door. "Emily," he said softly. "It's me, James. Can we talk?" It took a long moment before the door cracked open. Emily stood there, her eyes red and puffy, her hair a mess. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. "I'm sorry," James said, stepping closer. "I didn't expect any of this to happen. I'm working on it. The press will back off." "Back off?" Emily cut him off, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You think that's enough? My life is upside down. People are taking pictures of me, judging me, calling me a gold digger. My co-workers look at me like I'm a fraud. Is this what your world is like? Because I can't live in it." She turned away, tears spilling down her cheeks. James stood frozen, his heart heavy. "I never wanted you to get hurt," he said quietly. I wanted to see you again, because I really like you." But Emily shook her head. "Like me? You don't get it. You live in a mansion. I just wanted peace in my tiny apartment, and now I've lost even that." She closed the door, leaving James standing alone in the hallway, helpless. He turned and walked away, but in his mind, something had already shifted. He wouldn't lose her again. He called his assistant immediately. "Put more pressure on the media. I want every article about her gone within 24 hours. The assistant nodded but warned, "Sir, that might spark even more rumors. That you're trying to control the narrative. Or her." Meanwhile, Emily sat curled up on her bed, hugging a pillow, her mind in a storm. She didn't completely blame James. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But she was scared. Scared of the public, of the gap between their worlds, and of the feelings she couldn't deny. That night, she packed a small bag of clothes and left a handwritten note for her landlord. "I'm leaving for a few weeks. Please don't try to find me." She caught the last bus out of Asheville, headed for a quiet lakeside town on the outskirts, somewhere she'd once called home. A place where no one knew who she was, and where she hoped to find a little peace. The next morning, James got a call from his lawyer. The news articles had been taken down, but social media chatter still lingered. He rushed to Emily's apartment again, only to find the door locked tight and a small note lying just inside. The only trace she'd left behind. He bent down, picked it up, and read the short message, his heart sinking. "She's gone," he murmured, gripping the note in his hand. He knew he'd hurt her, even if he never meant to, and that truth hit harder than anything money could fix. Still, it made his resolve even stronger. He had to find her, not to drag her into his world, but to prove that he could step into hers. 1 month passed since Emily left Asheville. She had returned to Lakeview, a peaceful town nestled beside Lake Norman, where she'd spent carefree childhood summers. The small town, with its white-painted cabins and gravel paths winding down to the clear blue water, felt like a safe haven. Emily rented a tiny room from an elderly neighbor she remembered from years ago. Every day, she walked along the lake shore, listening to the water lapping gently against the rocks and birds singing in the pine trees. She didn't bring a phone. She didn't contact anyone. All she wanted was to forget. The judgmental stares, the harsh words, and the man who had unknowingly pulled her into the storm. But James Harrington hadn't forgotten her. Over the past month, he'd lived with a constant ache in his chest. The headlines had been scrubbed, The online gossip had faded thanks to his legal team, but Emily's silence haunted him. He visited her apartment daily, hoping she might return. But the door stayed locked, the crumpled note still in his hand. What did I do to her? He asked himself, for the first time feeling that his money and power were completely useless. He began canceling meetings, turning down gala invitations, and spending his time searching for her, not through assistants or PR firms, but by himself. Eventually, a small clue led James to Lakeview. A friend of Emily's, after some gentle persuasion, told him she had once called the town her safe place. James drove there himself. No driver, no assistant, just him and an old pickup truck borrowed from a garage. He didn't want to attract attention. As he entered the quiet town under a fiery red sunset, he spotted her, Emily, sitting at the edge of a small dock, holding a book, her hair dancing in the lake breeze. "Emily?" he called softly, walking closer. She startled, looking up, panic flashing in her eyes. How did you find me?" she asked, standing so quickly her book dropped to the ground. "I couldn't not look for you," James said, his voice low but steady. "I'm sorry. For everything. The media, the chaos, all of it. I never wanted you to run." He paused, locking eyes with her. "But I also couldn't forget you. I've spent too long living in a world full of pretense. And you're the most real thing I've ever known." Emily turned away, staring out at the water, heart pounding. "You don't understand, James. I like you, I really do, but I'm scared. Scared of the stares, the gossip, the difference between us. I'm not strong enough for the life around you." Her voice cracked, and tears slipped down her cheeks. James stepped closer and gently took her hand. "I don't want you to become part of that world," he said firmly. "I'm tired of it. The parties, the deals, the fake smiles. I want something different. I want to build something real with you. Here, or wherever you want to be. You don't have to be strong on your own. I'll stand beside you." Emily looked at him, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers. His words weren't just promises. She could see it in his eyes, the exhaustion, the hope, the honesty. "I want to love you too," she admitted softly. "But I need time." James nodded, not pushing her. "I'll wait," he said, releasing her hand and turning back toward his truck. Before he left, he handed her a small note with his number. "When you're ready, call me." 3 months later, Emily called. They met again in Lakeview. No rush, no pressure. James had changed. He sold off most of his shares in the company, walked away from the big projects, and moved into a small lakeside cabin with Emily. He learned how to fish. Badly. He once dropped the entire rod into the lake, making Emily laugh so hard she nearly fell off the dock. Learned how to brew the cheap vanilla coffee she liked, and slowly learned to live at a gentler pace. Emily, meanwhile, opened a tiny makeup studio in town, not to make money, but simply to do what she loved, helping local brides feel beautiful on their big day. People in town adored her for her kindness and down-to-earth spirit. 1 year after they first met at that car window, Emily and James sat together on the porch of their cabin, sipping morning coffee. In front of them lay the still waters of Lake Norman, and beyond that, the misty outlines of the Blue Ridge Mountains. No luxury SUV, no mansions, no paparazzi. Just 2 warm mugs, a hint of vanilla in the air, and a peaceful quiet that wrapped around them like a blanket. James held Emily's hand and said softly, "Thank you for giving me something real." Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And thank you," she whispered, "for choosing my world." They weren't rich anymore, not famous, not loud, but in their eyes was a peace no headline could ever capture, a happiness that didn't come from wealth or status, but from love and the choice to truly be together. Birdsong drifted from the pines, mingling with the soft ripple of lake water, like a final note to the story they'd written together.